Welcome back to the Fearless Females Voice podcast, where women's stories and experiences are shared in order to empower and inspire others. Before we begin the podcast, I want you to check out my free Fearless quiz, which will help you discover how fearless you are and how to overcome your fears to achieve your goals. This quiz takes less than 5 minutes to complete, and you can find it on my website, www.fearlessfemales.me. On this episode, I am joined by Mira Manek, the founder of Chai by Mira and author of 2 amazing books, Saffron Soul and Prajna. Mira has a strong passion for health, nutrition, and mindset, and this stemmed from her growing up doing Ayurveda practices, which she still implements now. This formed the foundation of her book, Prajna, where she talks about rituals for happiness. She has worked and lived abroad and more recently started her own business in selling delicious chai mixes under the brand Chai by Mira. After her divorce, Mira was going through a low point in her life, but she prioritized her self-care and happiness, and this instantly lifted her spirits. Mira is a woman of many talents and has recently trained in breathwork, EFT, integrative healing, and also practices yoga. On this episode, she talks to us about her self-care practices, what Ayurveda means to her, how the ideas of her books came about, and what she has planned for the upcoming future. I loved speaking to Mira, and her story was so powerful, and I'm sure you're going to love the listen. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. And I'd love to start with my standard question of, what does being a fearless female mean to you?
Thank you so much for having me, Janni. And what does fearless? I love the name Fearless Female. I think that's brilliant. And I think so many of us are held back by our own fears, whatever those may be. And therefore, I think it gives you a sense, when you hear fearless females, it gives you a sense of just no inhibitions, being fully present with whatever you want to be, do, and become. And not thinking there's any barriers to achieving those things.
I love that. And I can see through the journey of everything that you've accomplished to get to where you are now, you must have definitely practiced some of that fearlessness and overcome some of those barriers. So I'd love to know and tell more to the audience about what it is you do now and your journey of how you got to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when it comes to fearlessness, especially in my journey, I think for me, it's been more about cutting out the noise and not thinking too much and not worrying too much about what others are thinking, because I think that gets in the way. And that's when fear comes in. It's a fear of, will this person say this? Will I get accepted to do this? If I get rejected, if I'm alone here, and actually having less of that, cutting out that noise and not caring because you're focusing on yourself is what's most important. As for my journey, so I've written 2 books. My first is a cookbook called Saffron Soul, and it's all about healthy Indian-inspired Gujarati cuisine, a combination of my own recipes and my family's heritage recipes. And the second book is a book on Ayurveda called Prajna, Ayurvedic Rituals for Happiness, which is all about sort of rituals that can help you keep afloat in life, that can help bring about happiness. And also, if you're going through a really bad time, rituals that can lift you out of despair. And it came about because I realized later in life that actually my whole life has been wrapped up in rituals that are founded on Ayurveda. And I didn't realize it. And I think a lot of us Indian families have that. But at the same time, when I was a teenager and in my 20s, I went to a lot of health farms in India, or health spas and Ayurvedic health spas. And I used to think at that time of Ayurveda as a destination, somewhere to detox, lose weight, At that time, my dad would be like, oh, you're going to India, why don't you pop into this one and do a week there? And I did all these things and I realized what Ayurveda was and learned a lot about it, but I didn't bring it back to my daily life. However, a lot of the things that I grew up doing were Ayurvedic in principle. The way we ate, the key principles of Ayurveda, we sort of lived by. And it's only when I lost that and moved abroad through getting married and also just becoming a travel journalist, that I lost my sense of health, as it were. Even though I thought I was being healthy, snacking often but eating less, and wreaking havoc with my system and eating too many sweet things, which the high sugar, low fat diet, that sort of thing, was actually not helping me at all. As it is, I was diagnosed with IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, when I was younger. So this just exacerbated the situation, not to mention the travel, which also exacerbates the situation. So I was kind of yo-yoing between diets, going to the gym, eating this, like crashing. My energy would crash in the middle of the day. I'd feel like I need to pick me up. So I'd go and get a dark chocolate or something that would just lift me sugar-wise, or a date. But whatever those things are, they give you that sudden spike. And I didn't realize how much I was spiking myself. And it's only later, and only now really, that I realized is that I've been doing all the wrong things. And that's where my books came. And that's where I, started learning how to cook the food that I grew up eating, and then wrote about Ayurveda, which also draws on my own journey of spirituality in India, as well as hitting rock bottom myself, being super depressed and going through a really hard divorce. And that I also touch upon in my book, as to how these, in a sense, rituals and practices drew me out of that.
Love that.
Okay, sorry. One last thing. I do actually have a chai brand now, and I launched a cafe, but it's now turned into, I'm not running the cafe anymore. I've closed it after the pandemic, but I've taken it online, and that's sort of become my main focus.
And that is Chai by Mira. So I've got to say, I've got both of your books and I love Prajna. For me, I was able to implement some of the practices which you talked about, and they were very new for me. So it's interesting. You said many of us may have grown up with it. And when I was reading it, I was like, I need to do this. This is great. And it helped me with my routine. And then your chais, we've had those as well. And all of them are delicious. So we absolutely love them. So love the brand. Yeah, they're really, really great. And you touched on, you hit rock bottom and you were going through a divorce. And that's when you first kind of started, I guess, discovering or practicing more of these principles and practices. And that helped you get out of that. Can you tell us more about that period of time?
I wouldn't say that it was necessarily these rituals that lifted me, but what I did do every single day, and I realized in retrospect that they were sort of my package of survival or rituals, is I did whatever would make me happy and on that day. And I didn't think beyond that. I only thought about that particular day because I was kind of drowning. I was feeling like I didn't know when I was going to start crying. So I'd walk out with sunglasses on. I mean, I was based in Dubai, but I was also very alone. I was very lonely. And I'd go and do whatever, like if that day I felt like a spinning class, I'd do that. If I wanted yoga, and generally yoga was what I stuck to. And I'd also become editor of the first ever yoga magazine out in Dubai at that time in the Middle East. And that really opened up the whole yoga world to me, especially in the Middle East and especially in Dubai. So I had a private teacher, but I also like going to classes. And I think yoga really allowed me to be present, listen to the teacher, and actually do the asanas and move through a flow. And my body felt really good. And wherever those emotions were stuck, I guess they loosened up, or I guess it just felt good. And part of that reason, I would say, was, yoga, you have to listen to instructions. And I think listening to instructions and not listening to the voices in my mind really, really helped. So at the time, I got really, really into yoga. And after that, for 5 years or so, I went on different yoga retreats. When I moved back to London, I went to Mykonos, and I went to France, and I went to Ibiza, and I went to all over. I went for different retreats with different teachers, my teachers in London. And, I was very much a part of that yoga circle, so much so that I guess my cafe 5-7 years later opened up in London's leading yoga studio, Try Yoga. So I do love yoga, and I still do. Recently, I've actually got more into fitness and weight training, but I still love yoga, and I will go back to it hopefully soon. And I still do it. I did it on Sunday, but I don't do it as often as I used to. But I got addicted to yoga, and that was one of the things. But what I think I focus on in the book and draw on the example of myself is that you can take whatever rituals you want, going for a run, sitting in the sun, going for a holiday, meeting a friend for a coffee, and all those things can become your package of rituals. Waking up and making a chai for yourself, or maybe listening to some beautiful morning ragas, anything that makes you feel positive and uplifted, even if for a few moments. Because actually, think about your day, and if you can add up, say, 5 different moments of upbeat happiness, together, that means you're a little bit happier than the day before. So try and just encourage yourself to do the things that you know potentially will make you happy in those moments of sadness. And if you're going through a good time in life and everything's normal, those rituals will just add a level of oomph and lovely practice during the day and happiness. And it keeps you grounded. I think a lot of us in daily life can get carried away with things until something happens and we crash. We don't realize that we're in this stress mode. And these rituals can help ground us every single day so that we don't get to that point of sudden crash.
Absolutely. And I love that you've said that each ritual is just dependent on the person and what they enjoy and what they're passionate about and what they actually want to do, what makes them happy, because there isn't one answer that fits all. So it's great that you touched upon that. It's something which I talk about as well. My morning routine, someone else may just be like, that's just not for me. And that's absolutely fine because it works for me and it makes me happy. So it's great. And at the start of this, you talked a bit about the fear of judgment and what fearless is and overcoming this fear. Can you talk more around how you've done that?
Yes, I think over time, and I think a lot of the moving back to London, having lived abroad for, 5 or 6 years, and assimilating myself back into, I guess, what I always knew society to be, made me think of, all the different judgments that are put on me by other people, or actually no, it didn't, but I knew those judgments were there. I knew that there were opinions floating around, the divorce factor, what's actually going on in my divorce. It was all a bit, people didn't really ask me questions, but I get hints of things here and there. And I just decided, and I could have just focused my life on that, but at the time, this whole idea of food had come to me literally simultaneously when I moved back. And so I focused on that, and I literally put all my energy and focus on me, what I was doing every day, going for my yoga class, or focusing on my book that I wanted to create that didn't actually come to fruition until, say, 3-4 years later. But all these things, I just focused on me as opposed to thinking, oh, what might society be thinking? What is that person thinking? Or what? And I just literally cut the noise out by focusing on me. So it wasn't like I was trying to cut that noise out, but in retrospect, now that I think about it, I didn't dwell on that at all. And I think if you don't have something to focus on yourself, and if you can't focus on yourself or the things that elevate you, then those noises can get into your mind, and you can become fearful of others' judgment and be drowned by that. And in the sphere of ambition, of career, I think going into anything and being immersed in any career, any job, especially the profession that I went into, which is going from absolutely nothing in terms of no name in food, and I wanted to write a cookbook, and it's quite hard to do that when you haven't got any of it, or you haven't got a name created for yourself, or you don't even know anyone in the food sphere. And I think having no fear in terms of going to events and going to places and speaking to people without that sense of, oh God, will they talk to me? Will I look like I'm too alone? Will I come out feeling okay? Can I eat by myself? Like all those things, if those noises are part of your brain, and they will shut down that sort of the sort of fearlessness in you, they will actually create more fear. And so you've got to try and rise above those voices. And I think that's the fear. I think it's your own voices in your mind. But at the same time, the more you focus on you, the more you focus on the work that you need to do or whatever makes you happy, the less you'll have time to devote to fear of things.
That makes complete sense. And I think it's really interesting. You touched upon when you were starting that you weren't well known in the industry and you had to almost start from scratch. And someone who would be afraid to, let's say, network or go to these events, I guess that's something that's going to hold them back from growing their business. So it's great that you were able to actually take that on and think, right, this is what I want to do. I'm going to follow my passion and just plow ahead and continue on. How did you find that initial process of starting up a business, a brand?
mean, I have to say it's quite difficult, but I have to also say that I didn't really know where I would go with all this. I was just trying my hand at wanting to write a book, and that was basically it. And I didn't have so much to lose at the time other than it not happening. You know, I didn't have a potential other career. I'd come back from living abroad where I was a travel journalist and a writer, and I didn't really continue with that. I then became editor of a magazine out there, and that also, with my marriage ending and everything, I just left everything. And I also ran a charitable organization in Uganda, so my life was very different. And this whole idea of writing a cookbook came about, again, very randomly, on whim almost, when I was sitting in India one day, and I was like, oh my God, like, why am I bringing all these random snacks to India when Indian food is really, really healthy? And it dawned on me that people, if I think Indian food is unhealthy, then people out there think it. And I started speaking to people and actually realized that most people do deem it as being this heavy, rich, oily food. And it doesn't need to be. You know, why hasn't anyone written a book on home cooked, easy to cook curries and Indian inspired dishes? Why hasn't anyone written about how you can use spices in different ways? It doesn't have to be Indian. Don't just take the spice box out when you're cooking Indian food. And why has nobody written about the fact that you don't have to replicate the dishes and the flavors that you eat in restaurants when you're eating Indian food at home? You don't need to replicate any of that. Cooking Indian food at home can be very, very simple and yet very delicious, and obviously very healthy and nutritious. So that was what my aim was. And then it obviously, the journey was a lot longer than I realized. I didn't think it would take so long to publish a book, but in the process of doing that, I started doing supper clubs, and that was when the era of supper clubs was coming about. And I started doing yoga brunches, combining my love for yoga with food. I did a yoga supper. I started working with restaurants just because I randomly happened to walk into home and dining rooms one day, and the relationship started from there. They started selling my little balls and energy balls and like this other fudge thing that I make, and over time started putting my name on the menu. And so it all happened very organically without me having a real formula or an ambition or a particular purpose in mind. I'm not saying that's the right formula to have, excuse me, but and it's great to know what you want, because I think that way you can manifest it and you can really be pointed about what you're aiming for. And take all the steps in the direction of that. However, I didn't have that. And I'm not saying that, again, I'm not saying that's right, but that's what I didn't have. And I just went with my instinct, my passion, and my love for wellness, food, and writing.
I think the passion gets you a long way. It takes you really far. And that shows, right? When you're approaching people, when you're approaching restaurants, they'll be able to see that shine through from you.
Yeah.
And is this something that you have now with your vision in terms of manifestation and having a plan or a goal?
I would love to say yes, because that's what I'm working on. And I think I need to really work on that. Okay, I would love to say that I do have a vision, a goal, a specific goal in mind. And I think it's great for people to have your 5-year plans. I actually don't, but I do have a vision of creating and expanding my chai business, because it's grown in the 1 year that I've done it online. It's grown a lot, and I've realized the potential of an online business, but also of something like chai, which there isn't anything like my product out there, just because there's a lot of, syrups that you get. There's also a lot of powders that you get, but they usually are not vegan. They have dairy powder in them, or non-dairy, whatever they have in them. But there's something like a creaming powder in there. And there's nothing which contains no sugar as well. So mine has sugar, but it has coconut sugar, which makes it very different and gives it a nicer flavor and an earthy sweetness, but also obviously is a better form of sugar. So I feel like there's a lot of potential with having this unique, what I would say is a unique product with different flavors. So I want to capitalize on that, and I want to really put my mind to it. Because I feel like, having done all these different things I've done without a real purpose, hopefully I can do a lot more with a purpose. So I'm putting my mind to that. But at the same time, over lockdown, I trained as an integrated health practitioner, and I trained in breathwork, and I would like to take that forward as well. So I'm working on that as well. And I'm also potentially going to start working on the third book, which has not yet been crystallized fully, but I'm working on it a little bit. So yeah.
Wow, I love that. You have so much going on. It's great.
Yeah, I do. I feel like I do fill up my plate, but at the same time, I have to say, I really do allow time for my own wellness, because I feel like that's the one thing that keeps me happy always. If I don't feel good in my body and mind, I guess, because they're both linked, but if I don't feel good, then I just don't feel good. Like that will affect everything. That will affect how I work, that will affect how I socialize, that will affect me going out, all those things. So I really need to feel, I really need to spend that time, whether it's, you know, gym and sauna, or like yoga and I don't know, walk, sitting in the sunshine sometimes, or whatever it is. I feel like I need to focus on me a lot.
And it sounds like you really do know yourself very well, because that's where there are gaps with some women who I speak to, who I know, that they're not really fully aware of what makes them happy, or what they value, what they really enjoy. And that then is the gap for their, I guess, ideal routine, or understanding, okay, this is what I need to do to make me happy. So it sounds like you've done a lot of work on yourself to get to this point.
I would say I've spent a lot of time alone. And I think the other day somebody asked me, so how do you just write a book? And I didn't really know the answer to that. But what came to mind was I've spent so much time alone. And I think a lot of ideas and inspiration comes from spending time alone. And I'm not saying that that's the only way for it to happen, but for me, spending time alone, or doing what people call self-care, investing that sort of time, is very, very important. Because if I don't have that, I haven't invested in myself. And I think that's become so important to me. And I think in some ways you could call it being a little selfish. But I think the older you get, the more you realize the things that make you happy. And the more you realize that actually investing in your own well-being is something that might be selfish, but it really makes you happy. And so if you're going to give to other people, if you're going to talk to other people, if you're going to go out and you're going to speak and socialize and give to your work, you're going to be happy in yourself. So take care of that first, you know, whether it's meditation, or, you know, going for a walk, listening to a podcast, or waking up early and listening to some prayers or mantras or ragas, or I don't know, it could be anything. It could be reading a book, you know, spending that time investing in yourself and making sure that you're covering those angles of, you know, meditation, mindfulness. It doesn't have to be meditation, mindfulness, but whatever brings you to the present moment. It could be just listening to something. And then the next thing is movement, you know, making sure that there's some activity in the day. Maybe it doesn't have to be every day, but for me it is every day, you know, some activity, some stimulation, whether it's weights or running, a little bit of a running, but I have stopped running recently, walking, anything, you know, it can be anything, but making sure you do have that every single day, because that is not just for losing weight or doing some activity. It's also to release endorphins, which are happy hormones. So neuroscience is starting to prove all these things, that actually exercise, yoga, all these things, they release something called endorphins and serotonin and all these very happy, feel-good hormones. And you do need those hormones to actually feel happier. That's why when you're feeling a little bit low, you'll come out of a spinning or a run or something class, and you'll be like, oh, I feel so much better now. But that's because you've released all these endorphins, which keep you going for a little while.
And I completely agree with that. It's great knowing that, because I've spent a lot of time by myself as well. I've lived alone. I've traveled around the world by myself, and I really enjoy my time. And I do these self-care practices, and many women who I speak to know of these self-care practices, but they use excuses such as, I don't have enough time, or I have other responsibilities. And that then gets in the way of them actually looking after themselves and spending time on themselves. And I always say it's about creating boundaries and actually having the time to yourself. So how have you actually managed to do that? Because it sounds like you've got the alone time locked in and you work on yourself, but there must be other things that you'd like to do, or things that you could get involved in, but you've created those boundaries for yourself. So how have you done that?
Yeah, I think it's just learning to say no to things. I think before the pandemic, I was obviously running my cafe in central London, and things were quite busy. I was writing a book. When I launched the cafe, I was writing my book. Then obviously it was published, and But during that whole time I was running the cafe, and it was quite busy in the sense that I'd walk in and have to talk to people, and obviously you're managing staff, and it's quite a lot to take on. And so I would spend a bit of time going to the gym or whatever, but I was always rushing around, you know, from one thing to the next and thinking, oh God, when I wake up, I'm like, oh, has this been delivered? Did this delivery come? Or it's quite a lot to be switched on for that amount of time and all the time. And I think you don't realize until you take a breather, like, you know, the lockdown forced us to do, that you're like, wow, I think I was a bit too stressed, and I actually really enjoy this lack of stress. And so I wouldn't put myself in that position again. Okay, maybe I'll do a pop-up one day, you know, if it's really easy, but I don't want to put myself under that stress, you know, yes, I created a brand, and that's now online, which is amazing. I wouldn't have created that brand had I not done the cafe. And also it taught me how to run a proper business and to manage staff and people skills. So all those things are important. And I think it's okay to be stressed for a while, but I think you don't want to end up continuously being stressed. And sometimes we don't realize we're in that stress mode. So when it comes to, I don't have time for my own self-care, that's fine. I completely see how that happens. But at the same time, if you don't realize you're in stress mode constantly, you won't realize that you are in fight or flight mode, which means that you can't digest food properly, you can't relax, you can't sleep properly, and all those things. Sleep, for example, affects us so much, you know, if we don't sleep well, I mean, it can affect so many functions in our own bodies and mind. If you don't eat, digest well, you can get things like leaky gut syndrome, or you're not absorbing the nutrients from your food because there's a leaky gut, and, you know, things are seeping through. And all of that can be caused, a lot of the time, it can be caused by stress of some sort. It could be any kind of stress, you know. And when we don't realize where it comes from, and then we're treating the symptom rather than treating the cause of that symptom, then you're sort of, you could have prevented that whole thing by just making sure that every day you come back and ground yourself somehow. I'm not saying that it's the only way to, like, I'm not saying that's a recipe for avoiding those things, but I'm saying that the stress can be prevented by realizing, okay, clearly I'm quite stressed. I need to make sure that before I have a meal, I just, you know, take a few moments to have a few deep breaths, and that brings you back into the present moment. That brings you to that rest and digest mode rather than the fight or flight, i.e. the sympathetic nervous system rather than the parasympathetic rather than the sympathetic, if you know what the terminology means. But basically, you do want to make sure that before you eat, you arrive back into that parasympathetic so you can digest the food properly. Now, food is one thing, sleep is another thing. So are you tackling all those things? And those things can be, you know, you literally only have to do one or two little practices in the day to make sure that you prevent yourself, or you ground yourself and actually arrive here and now, and not take your stress or leave your stress at the door before you get home.
What are those one or two practices?
So I would say, the one practice I would say is breath work, because I think breath is the quickest way for our physiology to change our psychology. So what I mean by that is, how can we, running, walking, all those things could change our psychology, because, you know, over time, maybe we're really de-stressing. But actually the quickest way is if you take one long deep breath and inhale really slowly and exhale, and like take a few really deep breaths. And obviously there's other things that you can do, you know, like alternate nostril breathing and all these things. But even if you take just a few deep breaths before you eat, that's the quickest way to calm your anxiety down or any stress. And you'll feel it instantly. Even if you just go take a minute away from everyone, from kids, from family, whoever you're with, and go outside, go into your room and literally sit there, close your eyes and take some very deep breaths and really slow down the breath and almost listen to that breath going in and out. You'll feel de-stressed instantly. So that would be my first go-to method to de-stress yourself on a daily basis. The second is just, you know, making sure, like I said, you're covering those angles of movement or holistic wellness, you know, movement, something to calm you down, whether it's meditation, yoga, something, yin, some stretches, or listening to some calming music. And thirdly, sleep, making sure that you can sleep. And if you can't, then understanding what it is that is not allowing you to sleep. You know, are you having caffeine too late in the day? Would you perhaps benefit from having CBD oil, in your drink at night? Could you maybe insert one nightly drink of having turmeric with some saffron and cardamom or nutmeg, just to kind of help soothe your mind and put you to sleep better and quicker? Or are you eating too late in the day? The Ayurvedic principles of not eating too late, so that you can allow for the digestion to happen before you sleep, rather than the process of digestion happening while you sleep, which actually takes it away from the repairing mode that your body will be in when it sleeps. So there's so many factors, but all these factors have a big part to play in how you cope with life's stresses.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And you mentioned breath work, and you mentioned integrative healing previously, and EFT and Ayurveda. And I'd like to know, what do you plan on doing with all of this training and information that you've got?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of it I've done for myself, because I think the one thing that stuck with me from all the yoga classes I've been to and all the yoga I've done is the breath. And I've really, really got into Kundalini yoga in the last few years. And I think what I realized by doing all this breath work and yoga is that the breath can alter the state of your mind so quickly. It's so powerful. And one day I'll be coming out of a Kundalini class feeling elated, and another day I'll be feeling like so low and having cried, but actually feeling really calm after it. And elated meaning you could be feeling literally ecstatic, the way drugs would make you feel. So the different breaths have the ability to take you to altered states of mental being, or altered mental states. And that's really powerful. And so that's why I wanted to train in breath work. EFT also helped me when I was going through my really rough time 7-8 years ago. And so I trained in that because I found it really powerful for myself, and I want to be able to use it on others. So I don't know what I'll do with that. I want to package it up, and also integrated health is basically like a health coach and understanding nutrition, but more from a US perspective. The course is US based. So yeah, at some point I'll probably combine all those practices and go ahead with it. But at the moment, I'm just using them in different things that I do, be it on Instagram or sessions that I take with companies, whether it's teaching nutrition and Ayurveda. I do talks, and I also do classes, cookery classes, mostly focused on healthy eating. So yeah, but I think at some point I'll package it either better and combine it, or to create some sort of a method that we were talking about last time.
I know, I guess you won't talk about that just now, because that might be something that you're going to evolve into something more, this method of yours. But I can see it happening. I can see almost a studio or a cafe where you've got all these practices happening, along with then everyone going to get a chai and a quick snack. And I can just see it. It's going to happen.
Thank you. I don't know what's next, but yeah, I'm kind of just doing whatever I'm doing right now, which I'm really enjoying. And I'm also spending time right now reading things that, like last year I wanted to read a lot, but because I was studying, and also before that, obviously the cafe, I hadn't read a lot for 3 years. So I'm now reading more, which is really lovely actually. So, and my first passion is writing and reading novels. So I'm reading novels right now, and biographies.
Okay, well, I absolutely love reading. So you're going to have to tell me, what are you currently reading?
My current book is by Anita Rani. It's called, God, what is it called? I should know because I've almost finished it. I think I just forget. Oh yeah, The Right Sort of Girl. The Right Sort of Girl.
And is it good?
Really good. And it's a very sort of relatable book, because I guess it's about Indians or Asians in this country. And it's obviously everyone has a different story. She's a Punjabi girl who grew up in in Yorkshire, not here. But it's a really interesting story. And I kind of have known her for a while. So it's really wonderful reading about her journey. And there's a lot to relate to. And I think it's really amazing that there's these Indian writers who are writing about immigration or immigrant stories, living and growing up in the West. But we're the first generation to be combining both our cultures in such a way. So it's quite interesting to see that Indians are venturing out into the arts. And that's so great, because I've always wanted to do that. I've always wanted to write a novel. I have written one, I haven't published it yet, but I will go back to it at some point. I love writing, and people like Nikesh Shukla, whose book I've also read, Satnam Sanghera, whose books I've read, but I haven't read his latest Empire Land, which is next on my list. But I love Indian authors, and I love reading about not just India, but about the stories of people who've grown up in this country who are Indian.
Yeah, I love that as well. I've got quite a few books here. The one that stood out for me is The Henna Artist. I read that earlier this year. Absolutely loved it. And the author is Alka Joshi, I believe. I think she's American, but the story is incredible. Based in old school India in Jaipur. But yeah, absolutely incredible. Absolutely love that one. So Mira, where can people find you?
My Instagram would be the first place, at Mira Manek, MiraManek, and at Chai by Mira, which is my brand name, and that's Chai by Mira, so quite easy to spell. And obviously my website for my brand is chaibymira.com. And yeah, you can reach me on basically all those platforms. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook, but I'm a lot more active on Instagram.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast and sharing more about your story, what you're doing, and the practices which you've learned. It's been great having you on.
Yeah, and well done with the name Fearless Females. I love it. It has a great ring to it, and it makes you feel full of, like, you want to kind of go grab the bull by its, like you want to actually go and do things when you hear that. So it's great.
I'm glad. I'm hoping you've taken some inspiration from that and you're going to go on. I'm excited about your third book, by the way, as well. You said that's coming out, soon.
I don't know what's going to happen with that, but yeah, hopefully. I'm not fully focused on that right now, but hopefully I do want to do one, so let's see.
Well, whenever it is, I'll keep an eye out for it. So yeah. And also continuing with having that chai, because that's some good stuff right there.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Annie. And we'll speak soon. But thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Fearless Females Voice podcast. Don't forget, I have a free quiz for you which will help you discover how fearless you are. It identifies where you're being held back in life and will give you some tips at the end on how to improve your mindset and confidence so you are living your best life. You can take the free quiz on my website, www.fearlessfemales.me. Also, I'd love for you to do me a massive favor. If you enjoyed the podcast, then be sure to leave a 5-star review on iTunes. Thank you.